Muy buenas tardes. Bienvenidos a la Universidad del Sagrado Corazón. A nombre del Decanato de Desarrollo, les damos las gracias por acompañarnos hoy en nuestro seminario titulado Hacia una cultura filantrópica en Puerto Rico, aspectos legales y contributivos. La misión del Decanato de Desarrollo es la búsqueda de fondos externos, por lo que la realización de un proyecto de esta índole es poco usual. No obstante, nos mueve la pasión por la educación, por lo que entendimos relevante compartir información valiosa con la comunidad civil de las organizaciones sin fines de lucro, así como con contadores y asesores financieros del país. Es de vital importancia que las organizaciones sin fines de lucro, y como ustedes saben, la Universidad del Sagrado Corazón es una de ellas, entendamos y utilicemos al máximo los beneficios que provee el nuevo Código de Rentas Internas, así como aspectos de planificación financiera. Todos estos aspectos legales y contributivos estarán enmarcados esta tarde dentro del trasfondo histórico del proceso que culminó en la aprobación de la ley. Desde temprano en mi carrera profesional como educadora y gestora cultural, fui consciente de la generosidad que distingue a tantas personas de nuestro país. Se puede conceptualizar un gran proyecto, pero sin el apoyo necesario, el mismo se queda sin realizar. El jardín escultórico, la galería de arte, el pabellón de las artes y la plaza de las artes, todos en este edificio de Barat, existen hoy gracias a la aportación y colaboración de personas que creyeron en ellos. En la actualidad, como ustedes vieron en las pantallas previo al inicio, nuestro proyecto principal, apoyado por la filantropía, es la restauración de la Capilla Mayor de Sagrado. Esta estructura centenaria fue declarada Monumento Histórico en 1983 y como custodios de este patrimonio nacional tenemos la responsabilidad de mantenerla en buen estado. Dicha intervención comenzó en el 2009 y concluirá a fines del año en curso, cuando celebraremos con gran alegría la generosidad de todos los que contribuyeron a hacer esta restauración posible. A ellos los reconocemos como filántropos. Sabemos que el Diccionario de la Lengua Española de la Real Academia Española los define como personas que se distinguen por el amor a sus semejantes y por sus obras en bien de la comunidad. Una donación a una organización sin fines de lucro es la promesa para un Puerto Rico mejor. Proceso en el que se entrelaza el amor al prójimo y la intención de hacer el bien para un fin común. Sin duda, este es el norte que nuestro país necesita y merece. A nombre de la Universidad del Sagrado Corazón y de quienes trabajamos en el Decanato de Desarrollo, expreso nuestro más profundo agradecimiento a los conferenciantes Doug White, Guiomar García, Rafael Torrech, Yolanda Rosich y Kenneth Rivera, quienes aceptaron compartir con nosotros su conocimiento. Gracias a Alice Amador y al Colegio de Contadores Públicos Autorizados de Puerto Rico por auspiciar nuestra actividad, así como a todos los compañeros de Sagrado que nos ayudaron, muy particularmente a Lilia Planel, María Eugenia Lamadrid y Wanda del Toro. Dedicamos este seminario a la hermana Socorro Julia, quien es motivo de inspiración para todos los que trabajamos en este campo, así como para las personas e instituciones que creen en la filantropía. A ella, quien mueve el deseo de proporcionar bienestar a otros, la consideramos maestra en el arte de recaudar fondos para su organización sin fines favoritos de lucro, favorita, que sin duda es la Universidad del Sagrado Corazón. Hermana, gracias siempre. Y con ustedes les dejo a la hermana Socorro Julia, quien hará la invocación de este acto.
Me acaban de dar un golpe de estado. Me invitaron para la invocación. Quédense sentados. Yo siempre digo, ¿verdad, José Jaime?, que el Señor nos escucha en cualquier posición en que nos encontremos. A veces estamos así, que no podemos levantar ni la cabeza, y el Señor nos escucha. Por eso tú estás aquí hoy. Me refiero a alguien que pasó de la muerte a la vida y está con nosotros hoy. Hijo de una exalumna, allí Salazar y Alfredo. Muy buenas tardes y bienvenidos a Sagrado para participar de este seminario que nuestra Decana de Desarrollo, la profesora Adlín Ríos, ha preparado con un equipo de profesionales sobre el tema de la filantropía. Reconocemos la presencia de Dios que habita en nuestros corazones y que nos acompaña en cada instante de nuestras vidas, aunque no estemos conscientes de ello. A Él le pedimos que bendiga estos trabajos tan importantes que hoy llevaremos a cabo, que ilumine a los participantes y que al caer de la tarde y concluir nuestros trabajos hayamos aprendido algo sobre este tema tan esencial a una sociedad que debe pensar en compartir sus recursos entre sus miembros e invertir en obras que conduzcan al bien de cada uno y a su crecimiento personal, profesional y en valores, para lograr el sueño de la paz, la justicia y la solidaridad. Que el Señor ilumine a todos, maestros y discípulos, y que nos mueva a la acción concreta y eficaz, que logre mejorar sustancialmente la realidad inaceptable de que no podamos lograr el bien por falta de recursos económicos. Que Dios nos bendiga y que nos haga instrumentos para que se logre vivir a plenitud la cultura filantrópica, que es de lo que se trata hoy en nuestro Puerto Rico, al que tanto amamos y deseamos ver viviendo la justicia, la paz y la fraternidad. Que el Señor esté con nosotros hoy y cada día de nuestras vidas y nos demos cuenta de ello. Amén.
Bienvenida formal. Les presento al presidente de la Universidad del Sagrado Corazón, doctor José Jaime Rivera.
Muy buenas tardes. Es realmente un día bien grato mirar así y ver a tantas exalumnas, exalumnos, estudiantes, profesores, amigos de la universidad, miembros de la comunidad filantrópica y a todos los recursos que nos están acompañando hoy para compartir su conocimiento con nuestro público. Se preguntarán ustedes por qué Sagrado está haciendo esta actividad, invitándolos a todos ustedes cuando el pote es tan chiquito y todos tratamos de meter la mano a la vez. Realmente este evento cierra una celebración histórica de la institución. Hemos estado celebrando los 130 años del proyecto educativo del Sagrado Corazón, primero como escuela y luego como universidad. Y esa celebración tuvo muchos elementos donde realmente la filantropía jugó un papel importante en facilitarla y en hacerla posible. Entendimos que era importante y ha sido así desde 1994, cuando definimos que si la universidad iba a promover la responsabilidad social empresarial, nosotros como universidad teníamos que modelar esa conducta. Y comenzamos un proyecto de vinculación comunitaria, de acercamiento a la sociedad. Establecimos el Centro para el Desarrollo Empresarial de la Mujer, establecimos el Instituto para el Desarrollo del Tercer Sector, establecimos el proyecto de la Alianza para la Reforma Escolar, establecimos el Centro de Vinculación Comunitaria y creamos un proyecto educativo donde todo estudiante de Sagrado aprende sirviendo a los demás y aplica brindando su conocimiento y su peritaje a entidades comunitarias. Y así una secuencia de eventos y proyectos que quisimos que modelaran lo que le queríamos enseñar a los estudiantes. Y en este proceso estamos todos juntos. Todos ustedes, los que representan organizaciones sin fines de lucro, que nos acompañan hoy, y nosotros compartimos una misma meta, una misma misión, transformar a Puerto Rico. Y todos colaboramos en parte en la misión de Sagrado, que es educar para que las personas que educamos se inserten en la construcción de una sociedad más auténticamente cristiana, solidaria, en la justicia y en la paz. Sin todos ustedes, eso no se puede lograr. Ninguna institución sola puede hacer esa labor. Si no nos aliamos, si no colaboramos, si no cerramos filas uno al lado del otro y competimos, qué bien, pero colaboramos, porque la competencia no quita la colaboración. Y el espíritu que nos busca a nosotros y nos une es ese espíritu de darnos a los demás, de buscar soluciones que otros no tienen, de buscar los recursos que podemos integrar para ponerlos en las manos de los que lo necesitan para así seguir transformando la sociedad. Y por eso quisimos que el cierre de esa celebración de los 130 años fuera este evento para Puerto Rico, para nuestras organizaciones y buscar realmente un peritaje extraordinario que tenemos en Puerto Rico y que tenemos fuera de Puerto Rico para compartir saberes, para preguntar, para buscar soluciones, porque reitero, en eso estamos todos juntos. Las necesidades son tantas, tan grandes, de las realidades que vive nuestro pueblo, tan duras, que no colaborar estaría por debajo de lo que el pueblo de Puerto Rico espera de todos nosotros. Y en ese espíritu es que le damos la bienvenida en este día. Queremos modelar y lo tenemos que hacer todos. En una sociedad donde se pierde la credibilidad con tanta facilidad, en una sociedad donde se cuestionan los motivos y la integridad, nosotros tenemos que modelar integridad, tenemos que evidenciar motivos y tenemos que demostrar valores, conducta transparente y colaboración. Así es que esperamos que esta actividad, en el cierre de estos 130 años extraordinarios del proyecto educativo del Sagrado Corazón en Puerto Rico, sirva para afianzar esos valores y sirva para que todos sigamos comprometiéndonos cada día más con las alianzas, con la colaboración, con el desarrollo conjunto de estrategias, porque el país no espera menos de nosotros y no necesita menos que eso, porque con la situación que vivimos y la que sabemos que vamos a seguir viviendo por un buen rato, no tenemos realmente, ante los necesitados que dependen de nuestros servicios, otra opción que cerrar filas y colaborar. En ese espíritu les digo que pueden contar con la Universidad del Sagrado Corazón, porque esa ha sido nuestra tradición y es la tradición que queremos seguir viviendo, ejemplificando y poniendo a la disposición de ustedes. Así que muchas gracias, que disfruten esta tarde y que puedan salir de aquí con brío, con entusiasmo, a pesar de los alrededores, a pesar de las circunstancias, a pesar de los contextos, sabiendo que ha habido momentos más difíciles y este pueblo ha sabido transformarse y levantarse. Así es que yo les decía a los estudiantes en la clase graduada el año pasado, el año académico pasado, este verano, que nunca antes la sociedad había confrontado tantos problemas, pero nunca antes habíamos tenido tantos recursos y tanta inteligencia como la que tenemos hoy para resolverlo. Es juntarnos y hacerlo. Así que en ese espíritu les damos la bienvenida y esperamos que sigamos construyendo alianzas. Gracias.
Me place presentar a un distinguido amigo. Which I'm gonna say welcome, Doc, welcome to Sagrado, and welcome to Puerto Rico. El profesor Doc White es líder en la comunidad filantrópica de los Estados Unidos y actualmente es el director académico del Heyman Center, que es el Centro de Filantropía y Recaudación de Fondos de la Universidad de Nueva York. En dicha institución enseña cursos sobre estos temas con énfasis en los aspectos éticos de la recaudación de fondos y gobernanza. Doc es el autor de 3 libros, siendo el más reciente The Non-Profit Challenge, Integrating Ethics into the Purpose and Promise of Our Nation's Charities, en el cual examina el ámbito de las entidades caritativas en el contexto ético. Desde el 1979, Doc ha sido consultor de cientos de organizaciones caritativas. Actualmente enfoca su asesoramiento en la toma de decisiones éticas, gobernanza y recaudación de fondos. Es graduado de Dartmouth College. Se ha desempeñado como director de desarrollo y miembro de la Junta de Síndicos y Junta de Directores de varias instituciones, entre ellas Holderness School, Phillips Exeter Academy, Partnership for Philanthropic Planning. Además, en el 1996 fundó la iniciativa nacional Live a Legacy y fue presidente del Plan Giving Group de Nueva Inglaterra y New Hampshire. En el 2002, el National Capital Gift Planning Council les reconoció con el Distinguished Service Award. Al presente, preside el comité de ética de esta organización y contribuye mensualmente con una columna sobre ética y recaudación de fondos. Ha sido conferenciante en sobre 750 encuentros de filantropía de múltiples organizaciones y hoy, Doc, nos honra con su visita para compartir sus conocimientos y experiencias. Con ustedes, me place presentarles al profesor Doug White.
Demasiado largo eso. Mucho. Soy un profesor, pero no de español. Entonces, ¿puedo hablar en inglés para ustedes? ¿Sí? Si tiene una pregunta, por favor, pregúntale eso de Adeline, ¿ok? Adeline me diga, ¿sí? Okay. Thank you, and it's very, very nice to be here. I will speak slowly, and I hope that I will be able to address a program that is very difficult to address today because the world is in a very, very different place from what it was, let's say, a decade ago. I want to get this a little bit farther up there, so let me just do this here. I know what I'm going to do. I think we can do this. Part of the problem is that I don't have my glasses on, and so I don't want to use those, so I can use that down here. You can push the right button there, Dr. All of us are fundraisers. All of us are trying to raise money for causes that neither the government nor business will undertake. That's why you exist. That's why we exist, because we do the things that neither government nor business will do. Increasingly, it's true that many government programs are being cut, businesses are slowing down, and the third sector, the charities among us, are hurting even more than ever before. And today, we're at a crossroads. We're at a point in time where we have to understand what these challenges really are and how they affect us, and then, as important, how to address them as time passes. I'm going to go through a few slides. I don't want to depend on the slides. I want us to think through, look at me. The slides are only a prop. I don't mean for them to be our entirety here. But they will help us understand where I'm thinking, and I hope where I'm going. Now, it's no secret that we have an economic crisis throughout the United States. We have an economic crisis throughout the world. Every country, almost every country in the world is suffering in some way or another because of the economic crisis. This isn't just about Puerto Rico, and it's not just about nonprofits. It's about the way we live. And as you'll see as we go forward, that produces questions about our own values, about what we consider to be a society in which we're proud to live. And so the idea of a financial crisis is affecting us all. Some people say, you know, it's not that big a deal. Some people say it will pass. If you look at Wall Street, you wonder, maybe it's not so bad. Even though it's gone up and down in the last several months, it's pretty much where it was several months ago. So maybe it's really not that bad. And last year, $300 billion were donated to charities in the United States. $300 billion. That's a lot of money. And basically, that curve has gone up ever since they started counting. That money has continued to come to charitable organizations, good times and bad. But there are people who have a different view. Some people say that there are lots of job layoffs and the severe housing decline and the flat market and the fact that nobody's out there doing a lot of shopping like we used to do, that really is a real indicator of bad times. And some people say that we're actually going through the second worst time in the last 70 years. In the 1970s, we went through a very bad time too. Most of you in this room are not old enough to know that fact, but it's true. And no one in this room is old enough to remember the 1930s and the effect that depression had on us. We're even hearing from people who usually make large gifts, but are saying that they're going to be forced to cut back this coming year. A survey that came out at the beginning of August, 2/3 say they will cut back on giving to charity in the coming months because of economic uncertainty. One person was quoted as saying, "There's a bit of weakening in charitable giving." Now, there have only been 2 periods in the last 40 years when there have been a single year of absolute decline in giving. That was when the oil embargo of the 1970s took place and after September 11, 2001. I have here 2011 because that's going to be in just 2 days. And I apologize, but it's there for a reason, and the Freudian slip is that I'm going to be going back, I hope, if the weather permits, tomorrow to be a part of an observation, the 10-year observation of September 11, because a lot of charities took part in helping people right after September 11. But no other decline has lasted more than a single year, and that's because philanthropy in America is more deeply rooted in culture than equity crises are. And that's something that we have to really understand, that the culture of philanthropy is very strong. It's very traditional. It's got a large and deep foundation. The culture of philanthropy, if you really want to think of it, goes well past behind biblical times. The idea of helping one another in society is not new. What's new, relatively speaking, in the last 150 years are the organizational platforms that we have created so that we can better funnel our philanthropic desires. But the idea of philanthropy, let's not kid ourselves, it's very, very strong. And so it doesn't surprise me that people are going to continue to give to support causes they really care about, even though the government and businesses can't deal with them themselves. Yet, we are at a crossroads, as I say. We still have to handle these challenges. We still have to figure out how we will weather this crisis. And as I said before, it's true here, and it's true in Europe, and it's true in South America. It's true everywhere. So I have a few ideas. I'm not going to give you the magic bullet. There's no one answer. There's nothing you can do this afternoon so that by Monday you will have a different story to tell. It's going to be hard and it's going to be arduous. But part of me says, that's okay. That's part of what this world is all about. The meaningful things are those that are difficult to obtain. The meaningful things are meaningful because you've gone through the process of the struggle. That's part of being human. And so a lot of people in our profession, speakers, they say, well, here's the answer. Do this, do that, and then you'll be okay. That's not how I approach it. There are things we can do, and with A, a lot of work, B, a lot of luck, maybe a little help from above, you mix it all together, and boom, you might get somewhere. But here are a couple of thoughts. One thing you need to continue doing is asking for money and talking about your mission. Don't stop doing that. Don't say to yourself, oh, Senor Smith has been going through some bad times. He's our major donor, and we can't go talk to him because he's going through some bad times. Well, that's not true. He may be going through some bad times, but it's not true that you can't go talk with him. You can go talk with him. And you know what? You don't go there ignoring the realities of either the external world or his personal world. You go there upfront and honest. And you say, I know this is a difficult time. We understand that fact. But you don't go there and say, well, I want you to give more than you gave last year. I want you to increase what you've done, knowing. You have to have the conversation start with that level of honesty. Part of that honesty means that you still have needs. Your organization is in need of money, of support. And so that needs to be conveyed. We cannot dance around that. If we need scholarship money, if we are serving the poor, and we need to serve the poor and we need money for that, we need to continue doing that. We can't not explain that. And this is really something that, one thing I need to tell you before I go further is that I teach, but I also do. I have about 30 years of experience of actually asking people for money. And I continue to advise donors and their families and other charitable organizations. And so I'm out there still because I feel I need to keep my pulse on the realities of it. You can lose a lot in the classroom. Now, there's a wonderful place to learn, don't get me wrong, and I love being in the classroom, and I love the students and the learning process. But if you're doing only that, and you're talking about fundraising and charities and the role of philanthropy in society, it's been my view that I have to be out there doing it, actually, physically doing it. And what made me think of that is this last point on this page. Don't be embarrassed to ask whether they have been affected by the market decline. Will this impair their philanthropy is a good question to ask. It's an honest question to ask. And the reason I told you about the doing it part is that a lot of times people are afraid. They are afraid, and I've seen that. I've been in the presence of people who have been afraid to ask. And I think, you know, that's not really crossing the line. You have to really talk to people honestly. That's one thing we're all in together. They're not in one world and we're in another in this sense. They're all feeling the crunch. Now you might think, well, someone who's making $1 million a year or who has an estate of some several $1 million, how can they be feeling the crunch? Now I just know our profession so well worldwide that no one here is rich. Except perhaps from family fortunes from the past. But no one is getting rich asking for money on behalf of a charitable organization. Okay, let's get that straight. So you're thinking, how can I relate to this other person who's got so much money? And how can this person feel the crunch the way I do? How is that possible? Well, let me tell you, even though I'm not rich, I do sometimes hang around with some people who are rich. And you know, it's true, they think that. I'm reminded of having lunch today with Dr. Rivera, and he said, maybe it's going to be one last first-class trip to that ski lodge every week. But you know, let's say that's true, and there are people for whom that is true. They still feel that crunch, so it's relative. Like, we can't get our head around it, but it is true, and it is relative. And we have to understand that, okay? We have to respect that. Because these people have, for the most part, and statistics bear this out, most of the rich people of the United States, anyway, and I think in the world, have made that money themselves. They have made that money themselves. And so I begrudge none of that. I hope we have many more wealthy people growing into our society as the years pass on. I think it's wonderful. But as a result of having made it themselves, they're kind of cautious about how they give it away. And you know what? That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes when I used to be in the world of planned giving, the area of estate gifts, I would talk to development directors who said, well, you know, I did what you said. I told them to go see their attorney about this gift, and they came back and said they wouldn't do it because the attorney said not to. Now, why did you tell me to have them go to the attorney? And I said, well, because for one thing, it was the right thing to do. And you know what? The attorney's job is to preserve those assets, is to preserve the money those people have. And what's your job? Your job is to take those assets away. So you cannot blame, you cannot blame the person who the donor hires to protect his assets to protect his assets. Now, where does that put us? Where does that put us? Are we just those people grabbing for money into some person's pocket? Well, that might be one way to look at it, but that's not the way I look at it. But I do look at it this way. We have an obligation to explain why they should give. We have an obligation to connect their money with the cause. And if we can't do that, the attorney's going to beat us every time. Believe me. The family's going to beat us every time. Believe me. The donor himself or herself will beat you every time. The key is in the message. The key is in what you do. And the key is being able to communicate it so that this person is moved to help you. Now, I'll come back to some of that in just a minute, but I want to go through a couple of other things that are important on a regular basis. Don't ignore your annual campaign or your direct mail or your phone solicitations. Those smaller gifts are easier to give. And you know what? The person who is able to give consistently will ultimately give you more money. There are exceptions, but that's generally true. Why is that? The person who gives to you consistently is the person who's most committed to you, who hasn't forgotten about you. He's not, as we say in English, a flash in the pan. He's going to be there when you need him. And let's say he's giving modestly, or she is giving modestly. That's okay. And you know what? You don't want to forget those things. You want to encourage those gifts. You want to make sure that you convey a sense of appreciation for those gifts. How small? There is nothing too small. Well, that's not true. I actually got an envelope when I was the director of development once with 2 cents in it. And I remember writing back to him and saying, I think there's a message here more than there is money. But you know what I mean. Modest gifts need to be acknowledged. They need to be shown to be appreciated because you need to appreciate them. Now, even though it's true, we've all seen the triangles, the pyramids, where 80% of the people give 20% of the money and 20% of the people give 80% of the money. And so the common wisdom is that you spend your time with that 20%. But I have to say, having gone through very sophisticated development programs, how do you think those 20% get to be the 20%? They get to be the 20% because they were probably at one point part of that 80%. You just don't know who they are when they're in that 80% group, but they're there. Most of those 20% come from that 80%. So it makes no sense on any level to ignore that 80%. Those people who give you those small gifts are incredibly important, incredibly important. Be sure your fundraising is diverse. You have a mixture of the individual gifts and gifts from corporations and gifts from foundations, big and small. People talk about planned gifts. Now, I don't know if that phrase means much right now here, but up in the, where I come from, that's that estate giving that I was just mentioning. And part of that, and I know that if you have heard of it, you can say, oh my gosh, it's very complicated and it's got a lot of tax issues and it's got a lot of, oh my gosh. You know what? The most popular deferred gift in planned giving is the bequest. It doesn't matter. I did a survey and I talked to the most successful planned giving program in the United States, which is at Harvard University. And I said, I would like to do a study. And I know you haven't done it yet yourselves, but I would like to ask you some questions and I want you to give me some answers. Of the people who leave money to Harvard at death, not the people who give during their lifetimes, but at death through some estate vehicle, of those people, only 17% came from gifts other than a bequest. That is to say, the life income trusts and those other complicated things. And this is an organization that spends a lot of time on those complicated things, and to good effect. But the point is that the bequest is your major gift possibility, and it's especially important in times like these. It's not going to get you money today, let's just understand that, but it will continue the relationship. It will continue the commitment, and someday you will get that money. I know you're saying, hey, we can't wait till that person dies. And you know, by establishing a bequest, God looks differently on those people. They live longer. They're happier people. Darn. But so what? So what? You know what? The idea is that if your cause is important today, it should be important tomorrow. And as time passes, naturally, these gifts will come to you. And it's not insignificant. So when you're out there talking today about commitments and relationships, you're saying, well, perhaps you'll remember us in your will. I'm not asking for any money today because you're saying you can't give us any money today, but you know, we have a good cause and you've supported us in the past, and we'd love to stay in touch with you and continue telling you what we're all about and what our programs are. So let us do that. And you know what? A lot of the people who establish bequests continue or start making little gifts during their lifetime as well. It's all about the relationship. I can't make it any simpler. It's all about the relationship. Now, as I say that, don't you think it's a little ironic that the screen in front of you says something about the internet? Because although there are people who promote the relationship or the community in the internet, it's really from a person my age, a little bit weird because I don't really know those people. I write to them a lot, or they write to me a lot, but I don't know a lot of these people. And the people who are younger and younger, that is even more and more true. But you know what? You would no matter how established you are, no matter how old your trustees are, no matter what your mindset is about the youth, you ignore youth at your peril. Because as someone once said, little people grow up to be big people. And to establish this connection at a young age is critical. And to do that today, you're going to have to talk the language the youth talk. And that's over the internet. That's with social media. I know it sounds tacky. I know it sounds false. It sounds superficial. The jury's still out. I hear that all the time. But why would you give it up? Why would you not do something that's essentially free? Why not? And you know what? One more point on this. Your window to the world is your internet. Go dust it off, okay? Dust it off, make it real. Make it look as if somebody visited there in the last 24 hours. Bring it up to speed and make sure that somebody has that job. Yes, that means someone will have to have that job. Whether it's full-time or not, that's up to the size of the organization and you, but you need to have a vibrant, active internet site. If you don't, people are going to say, they're not really here in this world right now. And you don't want that message. You've got to be very, very up to speed. And I say that knowing that the other side or the other concern might be, if you're just playing that game, then what real work are you doing? You have to do both. This is not an either or. You still have to go out, and as we say at New York University, we use a lot of shoe leather. That means we have to go walk, to talk to people, we have to go visit them, we have to be in their presence physically. But don't ignore social media and the internet. Some interesting information here. It's not just the younger people who are using the internet. In fact, I'll bet some of you, let's say my age, who have parents who are 25 or 30 years older, they're on the internet more than you are maybe. That's a shock. Social networking use among internet users ages 50 and older has doubled from 22 to 40% over the last year. This was about a year ago when this survey was taken. Half of the internet users aged 50 to 64 And 1 in 4 users ages 65 and older now use social networking sites. So yeah, your dad, your mom might be on Facebook. Go check it out. We'll see what happens. This is kind of a weird graph, and I don't want to belabor it, but it just basically the bottom line is internet use and social media use are growing. Now, you need to use your time wisely as well. You have to realize, okay, we are in this economic crisis. We can't just continue business as it always has been. When we go out and talk to our donors, what is part of that message? Part of that message is we are looking at our own budgets very carefully. You have had, Mr. Donor, to look at your budget very carefully. You, Mr. Business Owner, have had to look at your budget very carefully. We've seen the government and how it's looking at its budget, but we don't want to use that as an example, but there we go. But we too take this very seriously. Even though 5 years ago, we don't think we were being extravagant, we don't think there was a lot of fat in our budget, times are forcing us to make some judgments, some judgment calls. And so we are looking at programs that have to be eliminated. We are looking at programs that have to be reevaluated. And we are trying to look at ideas where organizations might be better coordinated. There is a movement right now among people who are in the business sector, and there are a lot of those people who think they know everything there is about the nonprofit sector. They just bring the business principles into the nonprofit world. That really would work great if we got the chairman of, let's say, Enron to come in and help us run the show here. I picked that because about 2 months before it was known that they were going down the tubes, they voted as a board. They voted as a board to disregard their ethics policy. It wasn't just ignoring it. They actively decided not to follow it. That is extreme, but you have that kind of permutation in a lot of decision-making where economics is really, really important. So what I'm saying is there's a lot of opportunity for you to tell your donor how you are being more and more efficient than the way you've been in the past. Even though you're not making apologies for the past, but these times are forcing these tough questions and tough answers. Here we go. This is really this is so controversial. I talked to more CEOs and more board members about this issue, the staff. First of all, are they being used effectively? But although you might have to cut your budget, the fundraising staff is not the place to go. They're needed more and more. Now let's say, just as a number, let's say you have 10 fundraising staff. No, let's say you have 1 fundraising person. And last year you brought in $500,000. And this year you're going to bring in $200,000. And let's say, just as a number, the fundraiser is being paid $50,000. Well, here we can increase that $200,000 to $250 by eliminating $50,000 in staff costs. Well, that would be very short-sighted. Now, I say that, and that particular number is very round, but the concept of it, a lot of people buy into that, and I don't get it, but they do. Because by cutting off that person, then other opportunities, the kind of which I was just speaking about, go away. And so nobody gets called, nobody gets visited. And do you know the #1 reason why people don't give to a charity after they've given to a charity? You've got it. You've read the same stories I have. You've been at the same board meetings I have, and the reports are that they don't get asked. Nobody comes and visits them. It's important to stay close. As I said before, the key is the relationship. Everything else is just gravy. Be certain to keep your research operation in full gear if you have one. That is to say, find out from people. Today it's a lot easier than it was 25 years ago. I remember being up at Dartmouth College, and we had phone books for every city in the United States. We had maybe 45 or 50 subscriptions to newspapers. We would cut them out with scissors, and we put them into a folder, okay? We don't need to do that anymore. We have, a good thing here on the internet is we have the ability to do research in a way that we've never done it before. So it's important to do, and it's also cheap to do. Increase the care you give to donors who have made gifts. As I just said, call them, write them, stay in touch. Axiomatic. Past donors are also the best source of new gifts. Duh. Let's get that straight. They're the best source. Why? Because they already buy into your mission. They already understand the work you do. And make sure your board is involved in all the decisions you make, including your budget decisions to cut and program evaluations that are made as well. The board, it's been my experience. And this is one of the reasons I've enjoyed working with Dr. Rivera a little bit this past year. That is, the board is engaged. The board knows its issues. That is not true. I also work with a group called Board Source in Washington, and we talk, I do less of it now because I'm up in New York and full-time doing professor work. But it's true that a lot of organizations' boards are not that engaged. A year ago, somebody said, well, of the 9 million board seats on nonprofits in the United States, almost half are unfilled. And isn't that too bad? I mean, that's really a big problem, and it is a big problem. But I said, you know what? I'm really much more worried about those seats that are filled, because a lot of those organizations don't have good leadership and they're not engaged. And so it's important that you have an active relationship with your board members, and that board members, and that the board actually is very involved with everything that goes on in the organization. And here's something that's really extremely important. You go out there and you're in charge of all the fundraising. You come back, you've either failed or succeeded, and you report back as a failure or a success. No, no, no. Fundraising is a group project. You need the active support of your board. You need the active support of your executive director. Fundraising is not the sole responsibility of the fundraising staff. And by the way, everything I've said, if you want to check it out, go to your most successful fundraising organizations in the United States, and this is what they'll tell you. All of the things, but this one in particular. Fundraising is not the sole responsibility of the fundraising staff. It is everyone's concern. Now, in some ways, that's not so good. About 25 years ago, it was noted that college presidents now have to be the fundraiser-in-chief as well as the academic-in-chief. Oh, and then it became, he's less the academic-in-chief because we have somebody to do that. He's really the fundraiser-in-chief. That has happened. That's the world we live in. That's not going to change. But it's everybody's responsibility, the board, the president, the program staff, and the development staff. So you develop your relationships. As I say, those relationships are crucial. One-on-one meetings, individual meetings have to go on. As I say, research is critical, and major gifts will continue to be critical. And let me just, since I swung over to the other side, let me swing back. There are people who can continue to make major gifts. That person who's going to have to reduce his weekly trip to the ski lodge in his first-class jet can still make that gift. But again, it's the communication about what you need and how he or she can take part in that will make all the difference. As I say before, you've got to examine your programs. You've really got to drill down. People who make large gifts to you are very interested in how you run your show. This is a phenomenon that I think is a good thing, but has grown over the last 25 years, where donors are much more involved with how that money is being used. In fact, I don't know how it is in Puerto Rico, and perhaps we'll learn here in a little bit, but in many states in the United States, a donor has the right to insist that a charity uses the money as it said it would, or as the donor asked. And quite frankly, it's, to me, not a legal question, it's an ethical question, it's a moral question. If you engage this person to make a gift to you, then you have an obligation to use it as you have promised you would use it. It's just as simple as keeping a promise. I'm going back here for a minute. Make sure your development office is well paid. I know that's kind of a given here in this room. Always keep in mind that an important and respected nonprofit that serves an important community function will always find people who will help it survive and grow. That might be the most difficult thing to keep in mind, is you're calling people and people are telling you, not today, but tomorrow. Not today, but tomorrow. not today, not ever. A lot of times people hear no, and I would like to hear them, I would like to think I'm hearing them say not yet, because now is not the right time. So I wouldn't, there's a balance here, and this brings out your own professionalism, your own sense of humanity, your ability to deal with other people, that there's an idea that you could be too aggressive, but you can't, and you can be too aggressive, but you can't ignore the idea that you've got to continue going out and talking about your mission. It isn't always about a matter of saying, can you give us $10,000, or can you give us $100,000, or can you give us anything? It's a matter of creating and continuing that relationship. That's the key thing. And so let me finish by telling you this. My main message, no matter how it's clothed, wherever I go, is this. I don't think giving is something that ought to be considered to be a painless activity. I think it should be a sacrifice. When Ted Turner made his commitment to the United Nations of $1 billion back in the 1990s, what he said was, well, if I give $100 million a year for 10 years, that will be $1 billion. And I made $1 billion in my Time Warner stock in the last couple of years. That's how much it increased. So, big deal. I'll just give it away. Now, that's a very nice gesture. Don't get me wrong. It's a very, very nice gesture. But we take out of that some message that giving ought to be painless. And I said at the very beginning, and this is how I close, the idea of supporting charities is a sacrifice. It's a long-term commitment because we're doing important work. And so when we talk about how difficult it is to raise money in these economic times, let's not forget something we should never forget at any time. And that is that we're trying to create a compact with a person who's going to support us. And yes, that person is giving up money. That person is giving up stocks. And the attorney's going to know this and be okay with it, because that person in his head is going to say, this is a cause I am committed to, and that's worth more than the dividend or the stock price. That's worth more than some other things that are tangible in my life. And our message, it's hard because we don't have widgets, we don't have computers, we don't have anything tangible to give back. Sometimes we can put a name somewhere, but that's, the IRS has said that's okay. That's not really a thing they get back. The thing they get back is the satisfaction of being part of the human race in a way they feel most comfortable. And that takes us back past the tax code and past the organizational structure that we've had for the last 150 years. And it takes us back to the beginning of man and humankind, when we understood that we were here on this planet together for a reason, and that the only way we're going to get along is by helping out one another. So we're not talking about a new idea, we're talking about reviving a very old and good idea. Thank you very much.
Yo quisiera dar las gracias al profesor White y les adelanto que cuando salgan en las carpetas que les vamos a dar, su presentación estará disponible para todos ustedes.
¿Sí?
¿Sí?
¿Me entiende?
Y ahora, por favor, los micrófonos están abiertos para quienes quieran hacer preguntas.
¿Hay unas preguntas?
Sí, las pueden hacer en español,
Sí.
que el presidente es mi traductor, para eso lo puse en la mesa, para que trabaje.
Tengo a Adeline, mi amiga. While we wait for the gentleman to get up there, I also want to say one other thing that I had intended to say, and that is that I want to thank, Adeline is the reason we're here today. Adeline is the reason we are here. So thank you very much. You're wonderful.
Thank you for your presentation today. I would like to hear your thoughts about organizations here in Puerto Rico becoming 501c3s at least. There is no requirement here for organizations to be 501c(x). And about 6,000 organizations are registered right now in the Department of State as nonprofit organizations, and they're all fighting for the same money. So how does the 501c3 designation by the IRS opens doors so in the U.S. so people here can, reach out to other funding streams?
Well, let me address that in two levels. One is I believe the people after me will have a lot more knowledge on the technical parts of that legal issue. So I would defer the legal issue to that. But let me also bring out the larger question of what value is the 501c3 designation. It's a tremendous value because even though I didn't talk about it here and it was intentional, I did not talk about the deduction that people get when they make charitable gifts, and which you are going to hear more about because the laws here have changed. But even in the United States, I don't talk about the deduction because I don't find it to be the most motivating factor. But that said, it is a factor sometimes. And so it is important for us to take that into account when asking for money. Organizations that are 501c3 status have the ability to tell their donors those deductions are deductible. That's a crucial thing. Now, on top of that, and again, I don't know how this would work and what the application process would be, but on top of that, to some level anyway, and I will say this, but I'll give you a caveat, that gives the public some sense that the IRS has looked at this and says it's a legitimate effort, okay? Now, you laugh. Because a lot of organizations have turned out not to be so legitimate, as one of the things we're going to be talking about on the real 9/11 in 2011. And it's also true that the IRS doesn't really do a lot of investigating when it looks at charities. It approves about 98.5% of its applications every year, and I get the sneaking suspicion that the other 1.5 are denied because, a comma was missing or something. They don't really look too much into detail there. But the status of a 501c3 organization, first of all, if we could get it, and again, this goes to the other people who know more than I do about this, but if it were possible, and let's just assume it can be for a moment, then that would open up a lot of dollars from the United States in ways that are not available to you right now. So I think from a perspective of making your message larger and reaching more ears, it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to do. Now, related to that, but not that exactly, if you are a 501c3, you must file a Form 990, And I would be very aggressive about showing that form. I would be very aggressive. Now, in the old days, and I did some studies on this, I used to analyze these things, thousands of them a year, and a lot of charities did not want that information to be public. They felt like it was not public information, but it is public information. It says so on the top of the sheet. It says public information. I mean, how much more clear could it be? But a lot of people didn't like that. And so what I think a charity needs to do, and this goes into another talk altogether, but just we need to be more transparent. We need to show people more about what we're doing, and that'll make our cause even more strong.
Thank you very much. That was very illuminating. How about, what would you tell us about the world of museums and the challenges now with the cuts that we're seeing across all the non-for-profits? Sometimes museums are not considered to be important. They seem to be like accessories, and other social causes take precedent, but they are so important for education. What can you recommend?
You remind me of a politician a couple of years ago who said about the nonprofit world, there's educational organizations and hospitals and museums and charities. So clearly in some people's mind, a museum is not a charity, and yet it is a charity. Museums have been hit very, very hard. The arts in general have been hit very, very hard. And that's because people have this perception that it's for the wealthy. And so, it doesn't really put soup into a poor person's mouth. And so what comparative value can it have as a charitable organization? I'm going to be speaking to an Arts Alliance in a month up in Connecticut about this very issue. And there should be a couple of things going on here. One is there's got to be an understanding of the inherent value of the arts, of an inherent value of museums to society, to our lives, personally, in general. I mean, this is a story that I think museums need to tell better. But number two, I hate to go there, but it's true, and it's also going to help us. Museums and other arts organizations there's an extra economy that's created because of that. People come and they eat, people come and they sleep, people come and they do other things. The museum is oftentimes a focal point, sometimes not, but many times it is. And so it creates much more economic activity than would be in that particular community or that particular block of the community anyway. And so, although I don't like that as an argument because I don't want to diminish the inherent value of a museum in a community, this other argument is also true, and it is the kind of thing that politicians, unfortunately, politicians seem to understand very little, but they could understand that. But that said, the things we've just talked about here, talking about your story, telling donors what you're doing is critical. And this is one thing I have to tell you, I don't think enough charities do a good job at that. We do so much good that we sometimes think that everybody understands that and we assume that they all know. We do have to do a better job of telling our story, anecdotally and statistically, both. You can't leave either one out. I was just, I'm not very much of a fan of those organizations that rate these rate charities, but that's how they look at them, the financial part of it. So tell your story better and do all of these other things. Go out and talk to your prior donors, get them, keep them involved in the process. It's going to be an uphill battle. Finally, I would say that you might want to consider collaborating with other organizations of like kind. I don't mean to say necessarily that you become one organization, although it's possible. It depends on the situation. I have found that many organizations are very loath. They do not want to combine with other organizations. But I think there is an argument that says, well, you know, this group is doing the same thing as that group is doing, so why have two groups? I'm not saying that's the case here, but do consider collaboration anyway. Yeah.
Yes, I'd like to make a question. Upon the issue of getting into calling for donations, have you had the observation of how frequent that could be before getting annoying? Like, for example, you receive into the mail all these calls for donations, and sometimes they're so annoying that you kind of eliminate from your mind the entity. So do you have like a study or observations upon how frequent that could be in order to get the donor to donate, you know, without just eliminating you from their mind?
So you want to know what that sweet spot is, where you ask just enough but not too much to get them angry with us. Let me ask you to tell me the answer to that, and we'll both be rich. But it is true that you could ask too often, and you're so right. And today, because phones have caller ID, and they know, and stuff like that. And now it is true that charities in the United States, and I think it's true here, are exempt from the do not call list. So you can't be in that trouble, although the real trouble is the donor not being, or the potential donor not being happy with you. Let me go in another direction, though, for a second. I am shocked, but there are studies that show that direct mail is having quite a rebound in its effectiveness. Keep that in mind as a possibility. Now, what the direct mail should do is direct that person to your website, which should be refreshed and able to take dollars and cents. That's a crucial component to the direct mail success. You know, I don't know, as a gut feeling, I would call maybe once a week for 3 or 4 weeks, and you know, if you're not getting anywhere, let it go. I know exactly what you mean when you say you could get annoying, but we're all partly annoying anyway. It's part of our charm. And you know, I've actually been on the phone with some of these people, and they've been very responsive after the third phone call. But I don't know. There's no answer. I'm just telling you from my gut and from my experience. But I'm reminded of the effect of direct mail too. And that also is true. Direct mail can also take the form of email. That's another thing. You're not going to get that person's email except if you know the person. But and I guess by that definition, it wouldn't be direct mail. It would be a mailing, but it wouldn't be direct mail. But direct mail has had some resurgence in the last few years, so I would consider that. But I'll have a sweet spot for you. Yeah. Yeah, one more? Yeah.
Okay, another way that we raise money is through fundraising events, right?
Yes.
And fundraising events have been hit by the economy as well. Companies have changed their policies. Individual donors that would be sponsors of fundraising events will no longer can or see it differently. Even the committees that we form become afraid to contact their friends because of the economic situation. And one is presented with this situation, like how do we continue to have, I'm in the role of the person when in 5 years back I could raise X amount of money, and in today's world I can raise maybe half of that kind of money. And we're actively, my organization is actively trying to find other ways to relate to industries and become partners with them in other ways. But the fundraising event, I would like to know where you see it going, or what can we do about making fundraising events effective again?
Well, I don't think there's ever going to be an end to the people wanting their picture in the New York Times or the local paper here, going to the gala ball. And I say that with some mirth, but also with some seriousness, because people are drawn to events. Now, it is my own observation that events are very expensive, good times and bad. And if you're raising X 10 years ago and now you're raising half X, you're still spending the same amount of money getting it. So it's like half as, or more, okay, more. So the idea of events is really, you know, as a one-off, it's a very inefficient way to raise money. And that doesn't include the money that's spent by or the time that's spent by the staff, the stuff that doesn't get billed out. So I think it's true to say that events are probably your least effective, least efficient way to raise money on a one-off situation where you're just taking that event and looking at it. But do not ever, ever forget about the larger impact an event will have. You can create donors at events in a way that you wouldn't have otherwise created a donor. That's how I became a donor, a very solid donor at one of the organizations I support. I went to a dinner, okay? And I'm sure, you know, they probably made, you know, the efficiency was very low, but, or high, well, it was very inefficient. But if you look at it a year out or 2 years out or 5 years out, which we don't do a very good job of doing, and this is partly what I'm talking about in terms of knowing our own work and the value of it, that event becomes a very affordable event if you look at it that way. In addition to that, I think it has an appeal that nothing else has. I would not stop doing them. But what you're pointing out is, you know, you need partners for that. You need the corporations to buy into this, maybe some foundation support, or maybe a donor who would whatever. You do need that, and that's becoming less and less robust. So you got to work harder. The same kinds of things when you go to donors that I was talking about earlier, same thing, going out and talk to your corporate supporters for sponsorships for this kind of event. So my feeling is don't stop, just go at it with a lot more understanding of the difficulties.
Vamos a tener la última pregunta de esta parte de la actividad, señorita.
Gracias. Hi there, and thank you for your wonderful presentation. As you're probably aware of now, we have a brand new tax incentive law for individuals.
I'm
That's
going to hear all
probably
about
why
it.
we're here.
I'm going to hear about it in Spanish, so I'm going to try to,
Well,
I'm going to watch the numbers.
For years, we've had the excuse that we don't have a philanthropic culture because we didn't have that exemption. That's why, I mean, we don't have that excuse any longer. I mean, from this year on, every individual will have the opportunity to deduct 100% out of their deduction if that is given to a 501c3. Now, that's why we've concentrated for years in corporate money, because it was easy for us to reach it. Any ideas? I mean, we need to build a very good foundation, a solid foundation, as you have in the States. Any ideas you can give us for us to build a common ground? And I mean, I know for sure this is one of the best resources in order for us to get educated and go out there and start building that foundation. But any idea you may throw us in order for us to get together and start advocating more for the individual donations?
Well, this organization right here today is one example of things that can be done. When you talk about culture of philanthropy, we talk about this a lot in our classes because we in the United States do have a very strong tradition of philanthropy that is different, let's say, from from Europe. And we talk about how poor our country was when we started, and we had to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. Europe had a different model. The monarchy, the kings, the state would provide the museums and the hospitals and the schools. And so when I went to Norway 5 years ago to do a presentation like this to some fundraisers out there, I would, on the street, talk to people about supporting the hospital or the museum, and they asked me, why would anyone do that? That was like the weirdest thing the person had ever heard. And this is true among a lot of people because they were so used to the state doing this. Now, as it happens, we're talking to those fundraisers because the state isn't doing it as much anymore. And so they're trying to create instant culture. Now, you know that that's an oxymoron. In the United States, an oxymoron is something that doesn't make sense, okay? And so instant culture is something that doesn't make sense. Part of being cultural is being traditional, having some history, having some roots. And so you just can't turn it on like that. I don't think Puerto Rico's in that kind of a situation. I don't believe Puerto Rico has no culture of philanthropy because I think you've grown up in very much the same way the rest of the and I say the rest of the United States, I hope you're not offended by that because I think of you as us. I know there's a kind of a conversation about that elsewhere, but I do. It's my heart, okay? I really do. Mis amigos. Mis hermanos. But I think that the culture here is relatively strong. What's not strong is the economy, okay? Let's get that straight, and I think that's the issue. But going through and talking in the way we've just gone through this in the last hour here, with that conversation with corporations and foundations, but corporations, since you asked about it, will maybe be a waste of time, but maybe not. I don't think anything's a waste of time. If you go and you have a good conversation, the people, after you come out of it, know what you're all about and appreciate your role in society. Maybe not this year, maybe not this month, but maybe later, some other way. So I believe the culture question is one that can't be instantly created, but I don't think you're in that boat. You're in a lot better boat, quite frankly, and I know this sounds like I'm just pandering to you, but I'm not, than Europe is right now. I think there is a sense of giving back to the community here that has grown in a way that hasn't been grown in Europe. And I'm not suggesting that Europeans are worse people or don't have some philanthropic gene. I like to say we don't have a philanthropic gene in America. We've just grown up from our bootstraps, and they haven't. And now they have to kind of come into that reality that we've had forever. So yes, I think the culture can be strong. Yes. Thank you.
Gracias. Thank you, Doc.